From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. We begin in Brazil, where the Supreme Court is making a decision that could shape the political future of the country. The court in Brasilia is deciding whether or not to accept a petition for habeas corpus for the former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. If it rules against the request, it opens the way for another judge to order Lula to be sent to prison to serve his 12-year sentence for corruption. If it accepts the habeas corpus, Lula will remain free and will be able to stand in October's presidential election, where he remains the favorite to win.
All judicial decisions are important, but some have a greater impact than others.
Several hundred of Lula's supporters gathered at the Metal Workers Union in his hometown of São Bernardo, in the industrial suburbs of São Paulo, to await the verdict. Lula himself was due to join them later. They are convinced that he is innocent and that the legal case against him is a maneuver to prevent him being re-elected as president.
We are here today. It is the cry of the people for our president to maintain his candidacy until the end of the electoral process.
Today our combat is to guarantee President Lula's right to being a presidential candidate. If you want to get rid of President Lula, you should beat him in the polls.
So far, 3 of the Supreme Court judges have voted against Lula's petition, and 1 has voted in his favor. These are live pictures of the court where Judge Rosa Weber is now giving her ruling. So for more on the court ruling on Lula, we're being joined from Brazil by the independent journalist Mike Fox. So Mike, thank you for joining us live. What's the latest from the Supreme Court?
Thanks for having me. I believe that Rosa Weber has just cast her vote, so it looks like we're at 4-1 against Lula. It's not a good sign for Lula and his supporters because Rosa Weber, a lot of people saw her as kind of the person that was going to decide the vote itself. Now, it's still not, the game's not over, but obviously a lot of people see this going in a direction that's not good for Lula or his supporters.
So if the court denies Lula's request for habeas corpus, would he go to prison immediately? What are the next steps?
It would not be immediate, but I believe he has a couple of days, maybe 48 hours or something like that. They would actually have to write, a prison, request to pick him up. I think if that's what happens, then we can be seeing him jailed within the week, though.
So we're still waiting for a decision. It still could kind of go any way. If it upholds the habeas corpus, does that mean that Lula can definitely run in October's election?
Good question. Very good question. If it upholds the habeas corpus, then Lula is free to campaign, he's free to register, he's free to get the vote out. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that he can be the candidate. It doesn't necessarily mean that he'll, if he wins, he'll be the next president. Why is that? Because under Brazilian law, people convicted of corruption cannot run and cannot hold office. But Lula can still register, he can still campaign. If the Supreme Electoral Court it would have to go before the Supreme Electoral Court. They would be the ones to finally decide whether his candidacy is legitimate. The PT, the Workers' Party, would have 20 days out from the election to decide if who they want to transfer his candidacy to. So they'd have 20 days out to transfer that to somebody else, and that would be the new candidate for the PT's electoral candidate. Now, of course, that is a much better scenario than Lula going to jail now. Which is a situation that nobody on the Workers' Party, on kind of the leftist movements wants because of what Lula stands for and the amount of approval rating that he has. Right now it's 41% in the country, and he's way ahead of the polls in front of everybody else. If the election was held right now, Lula would be the victor.
Okay, so we are looking at live footage from the court. We're running that right beside you, Mike. But I need to ask you, we've been reporting that at least 2 Brazilian army generals have sort of implied that there will be some sort of military intervention if Lula remains free. How significant is that?
Well, it's extremely concerning, understanding the history of Brazil, right? The 2-decade-long military dictatorship, 1964 to 1985, and the fact that the military and military officials feel that they can lean into this is extremely concerning. Whether or not they would actually carry it through is another thing. You know, I was speaking with people, Lula supporters here in front of the local federal justice courts just this afternoon, and they were saying they didn't think there was any weight behind it, but still the fact that they were leaning into this decision is extremely concerning, and it has people across Brazil really, really intense. So it is something that we need to keep a lookout for. One of the generals that spoke was a general in the reserves, and the other one was actually the head of the armed forces. Now, the head of the armed forces, he sent tweets. He did not say we're going to call out a coup, but he definitely or a military intervention. But he definitely said that he was in favor of Lula being sent to jail and of no more impunity.
Well, that's really interesting. Mike, I feel like we might have to talk to you again tomorrow to dissect the actual results because we don't have them as yet. We've been talking to Mike Fox. He is an independent journalist in Brazil. In Colombia, the killing of former FARC militants continues. On Tuesday, 32-year-old Nelson Andreas Zapata Urrego, who was part of the reincorporation process into society, was shot several times and his body abandoned on the road. Social movements are asking the Colombian government to guarantee safety for the territories in the northeastern part of the country. This last murder occurred in the Antioquia department, one of the areas where narco-paramilitary groups are getting stronger. And Colombia's financial regulators has given FARC members access to financial services. The move came after it learned that several banks would not let members open bank accounts. The regulator says the former combatants must be treated as equals. It added that the party needs access to financial services to reintegrate into civil society. The FARC signed a peace agreement with the government in September 2016 to end hostilities, reform, and unite with the rest of society. Also in Colombia, corruption was the main topic of a debate of the 4 presidential candidates. They also discussed other issues including infrastructure, healthcare, and the environment. The presidential elections are scheduled for May 27th. Gustavo Petro and Ivan Duque are currently leading in the polls.
What Colombians want are concrete measures against corruption. I want to empower citizens so it is easy for them to report a corruption case. Secondly, we are going to make sure the culprits pay back to the country with every last penny of their fortune. We are going to face them and impose tougher punishments. Also, my government will be transparent, so you will be able to check where our budget goes.
In Colombia, we have the legal tools to fight corruption, even though some believe otherwise. As a lawmaker, I passed 42 bills through Congress, so we do have the tools. What we need is political will to use them.
We cannot lie to ourselves. Corruption gets into power from the electoral campaigns. Look at the pictures. Look at who is linked to each other, and so you can already know how the government is going to rule. So the first step against corruption is not a penny in exchange of a vote, not a contract in exchange of a lawmaker.
Presidential candidate Gustavo Petro focused his speech on healthcare, and he promised better health services for Colombia.
My first priority is to establish a preventative healthcare system. We will implement primary healthcare all across Colombia until every home in every corner of the country has access to healthcare. By promoting preventative medicine, we will make better use of the budget because prevention reduces costs.
We're going to take a short break, but join us again after a look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today.
Welcome back. U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Christian Nelson has now confirmed that President Donald Trump could be deploying the National Guard to the Mexican border as soon as tonight. The move followed Trump's outrage at a migrant caravan which was en route through Mexico towards the United States.
The President has directed the National Guard personnel be deployed to the southern border. And we ended so-called temporary immigration programs.
Does that mean that troops could be heading to the border as soon as tonight?
It does mean that, but what it also means is we will do it in conjunction with the governors. I want to be very clear, this is Title 32, so the governors retain control of the National Guard within their region.
The caravan carrying 1,200 Central American migrants has reportedly abandoned plans to head to the U.S. border. This comes amid other reports that say the group has been splintering into smaller units. The caravan had infuriated U.S. President Donald Trump and prompted him to threaten to cut foreign aid to Honduras. In response, the Honduran government defended the steps it has taken to reduce immigration from the country. It says it has tackled cartel violence and strengthened the economy. The government added that it is one of the most successful countries in the region in combating immigration.
We really have advanced on the immigration issue. We think that the claims made by the United States President are not fair, given what we have done so far. Also, all of these efforts to tackle immigration are predominantly financed by taxes paid by the Honduran people. The help from the United States is welcome. It is important, but it should not come at the expense of our country's dignity. That is our position. We're going to continue working on this issue.
Honduras is not the only country to have reacted to Donald Trump's declarations. Mexico also responded to the U.S. president's threat to send the U.S. military to the border. In an official statement, the Mexican government defended its sovereignty regarding migration policies. It says Mexican authorities are trying to ensure that migration occurs legally, safely, orderly, and with full respect for people's rights. The migrant caravan started its journey about 10 days ago from the Guatemalan-Mexican border in search of a better life.
They are running away from poverty and violence in their native countries. They know the risk of crossing Mexico without papers, where migrants are targets of extortion, kidnapping, and even murder. That's why they are asking the government for security.
We want stability for those who are vulnerable and departure documents, humanitarian visas, or some kind of paper to move through this country in the best possible way.
A large part of this group comes from Honduras. 250 children who are traveling with them are also victims of hunger and face injustice.
We have the right to progress and to get a better life for our children. There are mothers all alone here. They say that we are taking advantage of this, but we just want the best for our kids. Crime doesn't let us live in our countries.
The caravan has caught Donald Trump's attention. He has even announced that he will mobilize troops to the border while the wall is being built.
This wall idea is many years old. It's existed since President Clinton's government, and now it's being built. What Donald Trump wants is to modernize it.
The Mexican government reacted to Trump's declaration a few hours later. The Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Luis Videgaray Caso, asked Washington to clarify the declarations about the militarization of the border. Mexico's president also called for calm.
We have continued negotiations, and I have hopes the good nature and cordiality of our talks continues. But above all, we must continue to search for results that benefit all three countries that are part of NAFTA.
Social organizations and migrant families consider the Mexican government's actions too weak to face its northern neighbor. They are also worried and upset about migrants being used in exchange for the renegotiation of NAFTA, the economic agreement between the two countries and Canada.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has condemned an attack against the opposition presidential candidate Henry Falcon. He says 17 people have been detained in connection with the offense, which happened in the Caracas neighborhood of Catia. Falcon's security boss sustained a head injury in the attack after being hit with a brass knuckle. Maduro urged justice officials to ensure those responsible are punished, and Maduro rejected accusations that pro-government thugs were to blame for the attack.
I condemn the attack and the aggression against presidential candidate Henry Falcon's caravan. The moment I was aware of what occurred, I ordered an investigation. I can announce that there are already 17 people arrested, and I will make sure that everyone involved in the aggression against Henry Falcon will be punished by.
And in Cuba, officials elected in the recent elections are taking time to reflect on the goals and challenges of the next 5 years of government.
This 21-year-old woman was elected on the 11th of March as member of the Provincial Assembly of Popular Power in Havana. She knows that her work as a government official will be challenging during the next 5 years.
It will be very difficult not to have our Comandante Fidel with us, nor the legendary generation that started this revolution. But I won't be discouraged. This doesn't mean that we will do the opposite of what we've been doing for many years. We, the youth, are the ones in charge of keeping this great project alive. We must serve to strengthen the bond between the government and the people.
This is one of the main goals of the process, to improve popular power institutions and work together with the country's citizens.
We must report to the people every 6 months and work together to solve problems.
The incoming members of Congress will be in charge of choosing a new president for Cuba after Raúl Castro finishes his term as leader. This doctor of biology and elected deputy trusts that the new president will be wise and mature enough to lead the island in the best possible way.
I believe we will be in safe hands with our new president. I can't tell who we will be, but I have trust in our parliament, constitution, and the legitimacy of the principles of our National Assembly members.
On April the 19th, during the anniversary of the victory over the Bay of Pigs invasion, parliament members will choose a new president, which may not be part of the historic generation. A new time will begin in Cuban history, and it will be marked by the challenge of defending and perfecting Cuban socialism.
Dominica's opposition United Workers' Party is one member down in the lower house of parliament. One of their MPs has resigned from the party, but he says he'll stay on in the parliament as an independent candidate. Joseph Isaac, the parliamentary representative for Rosso Central, stepped down, saying it would be better for his constituents if he continued as an independent. He says that way he can vote on bills based on his conscience and not his party. Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt's Dominican Labour Party still holds 15 of the 21 seats in the parliament. LAN Express, a subsidiary of the LATAM Airlines Group, is cancelling flights in Chile next week in preparation for collective bargaining meetings and the possibility of strike action. The talks between the cabin crew and management end on Monday. If there is a strike, it's expected to begin the next day. The airline says it's cancelling flights from April 10th to 13th as a precautionary measure to minimize the impact a strike could have on its passengers. The situation will only affect routes within Chile. They hope there will be minimal impacts on flights within South America. We'll take a short break now, but join us again after another look at what our multimedia colleagues are working on. Welcome back. 50 years ago, one of the greatest civil rights activists in U.S. history, the Reverend Martin Luther King, was assassinated.
Even, he's not here, I feel that his spirit is with us now, and because of him, our human rights is getting better and better. So I feel really thankful.
King was gunned down at a hotel in Memphis, Tennessee. He was just 39 years old. King was in Memphis to support striking sanitation workers who were fighting for higher wages and better working conditions. He was killed by James Earl Ray. His assassination shook the world and sparked riots across the United States. Akua Ofori is a socialist and an anti-racism activist based in the Bay Area. She has been organizing for years against police brutality. She's been promoting women's rights and fighting LGBTQ oppression. And she was one of the lead organizers for the National March for Racial Justice in Washington, D.C. last September. She's joining us now to discuss Dr. King's legacy and how he has influenced modern activism. Akua, as an activist, you do a lot of work trying to get people to confront their racism and the harm it causes. How much is your approach informed and influenced by Dr. King's work and his life?
Yes, thanks for having me. I think there's a lot to learn from Dr. King's legacy. I think one of the key things is his approach to organizing, which always included masses of people, right? And I think there is a contention in the current day about how do we end racism today, and whether it's something we can do through different avenues, whether it is NGOs or working with politicians, or taking mass action and direct action, civil disobedience, etc. And I think that particular tactic, that of mass civil disobedience, remains one of the most important contributions of Dr. King's legacy and what he did. And I think through mass struggle with masses of people in the South and eventually it went up north, he was able, along with thousands of other activists, able to win equal rights under the law for Black people who were living under Jim Crow segregation for decades.
So, Akua, when Dr. King was fighting for racial justice in the 1950s and 60s, he was painted as a terrorist in the media, very much in the same way current activist groups are being demonized by the mainstream media. He's now been vindicated and he's an icon. How does that belief that people can change keep you going?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really important to acknowledge how Dr. King's imagery has been sanitized. Like he said, back in the 60s, he was considered a terrorist and too radical. In fact, as his message became more radical, addressing issues of economic injustice, some liberal institutions and politicians abandoned him. And I think it also shaped what eventually became his assassination. He was in Memphis, basically campaigning around the demands of poor Black sanitation workers who had lost 2 workers to basically death by being crushed by one of the machinery. Dr. King came and supported the struggle in Memphis, demanding better wages and better working conditions, things that we still fight for today. Today we see workers struggling in West Virginia, Kentucky, Oklahoma, teachers basically demanding better wages and working conditions. And so the conditions are still there. The question is, how do we bring back this legacy of mass struggle, of civil disobedience, of working people basically fighting for their rights, kind of, putting a vision of self-determination.
Akua, I have one more question for you, because you were just talking about, the circumstances under which Dr. King died. Dr. King died a very violent death, and we're seeing racial rights activists being killed all over the United States in mysterious circumstances. As an anti-racism activist yourself, do you fear for your own life? Why do you still persist with this sort of work, despite the possible risk it may have to your person?
Right. Well, I think violence is a strategy of the ruling class, those in power, to basically repress protest. And if we stop organizing and respond to that, we will never actually win the demands that we want. What we need to do is actually grow our numbers. The more of us there are, the harder it is to crush our struggles. And so I think with that, we need to, that's the vision and perspective I take as an activist. I can't do this alone. I have to organize with many more people so that even if someone like myself or others are taken out through violence, the movement continues. So building base, bringing in more people, building more leadership, and continuing the struggle from the grassroots is really the way to counter these acts of violence.
Thank you so much, Akua. I really appreciate talking to you. And we are going to continue following your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
In another show of solidarity, the 2018 Commonwealth Games has begun on the Gold Coast in Australia. It is the 21st edition of the Games. Aboriginal performers from the Gold Coast welcome the athletes and spectators with a traditional dance ceremony. The Games will be held until April 15th. More than 6,000 participants from over 70 countries will compete in 23 sporting disciplines. And that report has brought us to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can join us on our website at telesyourtv.net/English. We are also on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for Tell Us Your English. I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.